Hello everybody, hello, and welcome back. So today I'm going to be showing you how I create my two-part caster molds for all of my silicone mold making. I use this free software called Autodesk Tinkercad. You can just sign in with your Google account or make a free account, it doesn't really matter. But what you can do is once you get to this stage where you can create your own designs. Once you start creating your designs, you want to create a 3D design specifically, and then it'll load into this area here. You can change some settings in the settings here. You can show the grids, show shadows, and set your unit of measurements if you want millimeters or inches. I'm going to use inches for now because it's easier for me to say. I'm more fluent in that. However, I think it's way easier to measure in millimeters personally, right? And then you can set this width to whatever. You can set it to your print bed, which my Anycubic Mega X is basically a 12 by 12 inch, but I'll keep it small for now just so we can understand what's going on here. So the grid will just be 6 by 6, and then you can close the settings, and then that's everything that's going on here. So once you get to this stage where you're ready to start pulling stuff in, this software is really cool, very simplistic, and I am not a 3D modeler by any means, but this is a very easy tool to use. So you can see here these are standard cutaway parts, and these are like standard just solid parts. So we're going to start off by taking a cylinder and just putting it into the middle of the build plate. So we have a cylinder here. Wow, great, right? So there's a few settings on the right hand side here. We have the number of sides. You can kind of see that it's very segmented. I usually just max this out, and then I max out the segments here too. Don't touch the bevel. We don't need a bevel. But this is just to make it basically as clean as a cylinder as you can. I don't think this part really matters, but it's just something I do. So what this piece here is going to be is what we're trying to cast. So let's say we're trying to cast a model that is on a 2-inch base, or even a 1-inch base. I guess it doesn't really matter, but we can start off with a 1-inch base first, I guess. So with a 1-inch base, and we'll say it's higher than an inch. We'll say it's maybe 1.5 inches tall. So like this is the model that we would have. So it fits on a base. It's 1.5 inches tall that we want to cast, and this is the entirety of the mini. So now, since we know how big the mini is, we're going to need to give it a little bit of room, right? So what we can do is, if you hold shift and click on this corner here, you can increase it. This is by 1/8 of an inch, and then that would be 1/4 of an inch. So now we have our device, or our model here, that it gives us our 1/4 of an inch all the way around our model. So there's more room for silicone and for us to get it out, and just room on top too, which we'll come back to as well. But now, since we have that, this is going to be our cutaway piece. So you can actually see up here in the right hand side, we can keep it a solid or turn it to a hole. We're going to turn it to a hole. So this is going to be a cutaway piece from the actual model itself. So now what we're going to do is we're going to bring in another piece here. Same concept, just drag and dropped it, increase the size, increase the segments, and then what we can do is we can just match the size. So you can see it's 1 1/4. So if we go over here, click on this, you can see here 1 1/4 is basically 1.25. So if you come over here, click on this 1.25, and then we'll come over here 1.25. 5. There we go. So now we have our cylinder that way, and then we want it to be the same height. So again, if you see it, you can click here. You can copy it too if you want. Control C, and then you can Control V it if it copied correctly for some reason. Okay, I guess it didn't copy correctly. Let's try again. Control C, Control V. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so now we have our model, right? And how big we need it to be. The cool thing about this software is you could try to line this up manually like this. You know, it's not too bad since we're using a very small thing. But let's say you have a bunch of pieces or a piece that you can't quite line up perfectly. You can grab both of the pieces by dragging and dropping. So now they're both selected. You can come up to here, up to the top right, where it says align. And now these little dots come up. And what you can do is if you see that, it'll line them up in the center, and then if you click on this one, it'll line them up perfectly. So now they're perfectly aligned with one another. Okay, but now the thing of it is, right, is that we don't want this piece, we want this piece, right? So we need to increase the size of this thing. I like to do a 1/2 inch total on the entirety of the sides. So if you look at this, if we want to add a 1/2 inch to the total like circumference, it's going to be once it lets me click on it, come on. Okay, there you go. It will be 5 plus 7 is going to, or 5 plus 2 is 7, and then over here, same concept, 7. All right, and then we don't actually need to make it any taller because that's the height we wanted. So we can then go select both pieces because you can see that they're off center again, and we go align, and then you can bring them back to the center, and then there you go. So now we have basically a 1/4 inch on both sides of the cylinder, and we'll have a pretty good, a decent size mold cavity too. So this is going to be very hardy since it's a 1/4 inch thick, which is nice. But once we get to this stage, we can grab both pieces again, and then there's this one up here where we group them together. So what will happen is we take the solid piece and the whole piece, and when we get a cutaway piece. So now we're almost done. And what we then have to do is, if you look at this, and we take, come on, we take our 1.75. You can copy that if you want. Open up a calculator, and you can paste it, divide it by 2, and you get 0.875. So what I like to do then is I take a square, and then on one of the sides, oops, I'm clicking on the side here, but then you take 0.875. So we have the 7, yeah, that's fine. And then we just need to make it wide enough. This doesn't have to be, it just needs to cover the whole thing. It doesn't really need to be perfect. And then it needs to be tall enough. So again, we'll just kind of go like that. You can see that these measurements don't really matter because we're just cutting it away. It doesn't need to be perfect. But what we want to do is then select both pieces again like we did before. Go to align, and then what we're going to do is set them like this, and then we can set them in the middle too so they're perfectly centered. But that's going to be exactly half of our cylinder right there. So when we group these two together, we'll have a perfectly split in half piece. And this is because we took the diameter of the circle, and then we just basically halved it, and that gave us our halfway point for the square that needs to be the cutting block. So we'll group those together now. Bam! So now we have this piece right here. Pretty cool. So now we're halfway done. Though the next piece that we need to do is we need to grab another one of these, and then we'll need to reduce this to this, and reduce this to here, and then increase it to here. So all I did was kind of basically make a further piece inside of this. So now if we come back in here, or if we zoom in, and we go one more in, you can see we make 1/8 of an inch. I feel like 1/8 of an inch is a pretty solid unit of measurement for this. I like to push it back, but if we keep moving it side to side, you can see that we're not getting in the middle of it. I'm sorry. So what we need to do is we need to increase our space usage here. So we'll increase it to 1/16. This will move us in half. So what that now did is it put us right into the middle of where that seam is supposed to be, right? And this is a pretty big piece, so we could even, if we wanted, minimize this just a little. So we'll take it in one, but see how it's too small? So if we go in another one to a 32, we'll see that should be half. And then we'll increase it again to 1/64 to move it over. So now again, you can see here, it's in the middle of the two pieces. Now, we need to duplicate this. So if you hold Control and press D, you duplicate it. Otherwise, the other option you could do is if you just right-click it, you can copy it. Control C, Control V. Both of those options work. So now we're going to move it over to here, to the other side. So now we're in the center again, you can see. But we want a little bit of extra clearance. So if this side's the male end, we need this side to be the female end. But the female end needs to be just a hair smaller, or larger, sorry. So what we'll do is we'll increase this side and this side by just a hair. Again, it's just a small amount. We're doing 1/64 of an inch. So it is a little bit larger, but not a huge amount. But we need this to be changed to this, right? Now, there is only one other thing that we haven't done, right? Is we haven't increased the depth. So the depth is still the same, but I don't want to increase the depth this way into the actual mold casing. So what we'll do is we'll just reduce this one by a 1/16 of an or 1/64 of an inch. So this side has been reduced just a little bit. And now what we'll do is we'll select all of these pieces, merge them together, and there you go. We have our mold cavity. Now you're probably thinking, well, this is only one side. So if you duplicate this, we'll do Control D, and we'll also increase this to 1/8 of an inch. You'll see that the way that this is set up, the way that this works, you actually don't need two. You only need one. So if we look here, and then we move it back a little bit, it's a little too close. You can see here that no matter which way, if you print two of these, even if they're in the same orientation, they'll always be able to merge together like this because of the male and female end being perfectly merged together. You can kind of see that this is maybe a little too much space here, but you got to remember we have a bit of play with our printers. So I like to keep it like this, just like a 1/64 of an inch. It looks big here, but once you actually print it, it's not that noticeable. Again, you could make this smaller if you want to try to hone it in to make it perfectly tight. I don't really mess with that too much. But that's it. That's the whole process on how I do these. I usually measure the piece on what I want. So we start off with an inch base and about 1.5 inches tall. But if you needed something larger, you would just do the same process, but just measure them larger. The squares, or rectangles for that matter, which depending, are exactly the same. We create the size that we want, the surface area, and then we just subtract with another square in the middle of that square to see how much we need to remove to have this. I like doing circle casting molds like this for ones that might have a cut, for a cut mold, and I like using squares for my dump molds. I just find it easier to do personally because a square is a little bit more robust in its corners, whereas in a circle mold, usually it doesn't have as much resin or silicone, which is nice, but then the resin that goes into it is very close to the edges and could cause damage when trying to push out without a cut. So that's it. I hope everybody enjoyed this video. Oh, I should probably show this first actually. So we can rename it. So we'll do 1 inch by 1.5 inch caster mold. That's usually what I call it. And then what you can do is to select one of the pieces. Once you have both, you can even delete it. It doesn't matter. You can delete it and export, and you can do it as an OBJ, an STL, or whichever one's your focus. I usually do STL. You just download it, and you're good to go. Print it off. Print 2 of them, and you should have yourself a caster. But I hope everybody enjoyed this video and my process of making my own caster molds. And I guess until the next time, see you all later. Peace.